This week's episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 15th of June 2022 at home in Wicklow. And it is an episode mostly dedicated to the idea of dropping one's defences. And I make arguments for the benefits of the laying down of arms and leaving oneself open. And as ever with the podcast, there was a point I wanted to make and it slipped my mind. But a key idea, of course, of having one's defences down is it allows one to receive more. And if we have our defences up, we're often depriving ourselves of receiving things. And that's a loss. That is a less rich experience in which to place ourselves. So, sure, putting the defensive guard down may leave us feeling more vulnerable, more exposed, but it means we're more open to receiving and to seeing and being aware of good things as well. And it just allows our consciousness to go to a different place and to move away from the sensation of being embattled, because sometimes we're not embattled, and sometimes that is a projection of other fears and other beliefs that we have. Anyway, that was a point I wanted to make and failed to, so you're getting it now. Also, as part of this little preamble, I read somewhere, I'm sure I think it was actually a Patreon newsletter, and they were advocating naming your listeners. Now, I don't mean naming them as in exposing them, but to adopt a collective name for people who listen to your podcast. I was reflecting on that, and I don't have any great answer. Clear heads. I mean, the second I say it, I find myself resisting it. I just go, we should go on. But often, in fact, last week, I know I reached out, gave a shout out to my friend Shane in San Francisco, and I referred to him as friend of the show, friend of the podcast. And I also remember that in previous episodes I've said this isn't a show, it's a tell. So I might start referring to my listeners as friends of the tell. What about that? Is that gammy? I'll keep rolling with a few of them just to see over the coming episodes. But I quite like that one, friend of the tell. Because it's not immediately obvious. It's not instantly a literal thing. The tell could be a place. It could be a code, a bonding pact. Anyway, that's there too. So you'll find when you listen, I tested positive for COVID a week ago, so I've had a week of lying low. So the first part of the episode is a bit of a roundup of some home entertainment, some movies I took in alone and also with my daughter. And there is a connection. There is a connection to my main thesis in today's episode. So bear with it. Most of the episode is dedicated to this idea of dropping one's defences. So get into it. I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, I'll see you there, right around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you are listening to The Clear Out. Welcome. How are you today? So, I think one of the last things I said on last week's episode was that I think I expressed the belief that I was turning a corner. I'd been battling some dose for a couple of weeks, that had compromised me energy-wise and voice-wise, and my sinuses were being battered, everything. I wasn't feeling well. And that's why last week I ended up mainly reciting American poetry, because I didn't have sufficient brain space to ramble and improvise around a chosen theme the way I normally do. And so, yes, by the end of last week's episode, I said with a certain amount of confidence, I think I'm turning a corner. And I did turn a corner, and I ran straight into COVID. I think less than 12 hours after I finished recording last week's episode, I tested positive for COVID, and then had a miserable few days. I've just been battered by the virus, the dreaded vid. The whole system took a pummeling. My wife also tested positive around the same time, and we're just about out of it. My wife's slightly behind in the recovery stakes, but it's been a week of laying very, very low. And yes, it's there's been a lot of sleeping, and there have been quite a few movies as well. So I might do a little roundup of the movies. But one of the things that struck me in my weakened state and my forced stop. Now I did speak about this idea earlier this year when I was overtaken by a bout of violent vomiting. And that raised some musings for me, as well as what was in my stomach. But this time round, I found myself very quickly just giving myself over to the isolation status and the self-imposed house arrest. And what I thought was, and I'm going to expound on this as the episode goes on, but what I thought was, sometimes it's actually lovely to just drop the defences, to let the defences down and be in a very open, exposed state. And of course that's probably another way of describing being vulnerable, being open, and I suppose I think of it as being receptive. And what has struck me over this last week is, in our normal mode, our normal busy mode, the day-to-day getting on with life mode, even for someone like me who sort of lives quite, in quite an irregular, hard to pin down way, the nature of how I try to earn a crust and the types of things that I do, particularly with the podcast, but also with some of the wellness content I produce for Aura. Can you feel my aura? Naturally, I'm reflecting on things, I'm thinking about things, I'm trying to make sense of things, because that's the way my brain is inclined anyway, but also because now with the podcast and also with producing stuff for Aura, Can You Feel My Aura? There's a purpose. There's a purpose to reflecting. There's a purpose to trying to draw connections and clarify things and compose pieces of organized thought that can be presented for the consumption of others, here on the podcast quite casually and often with humor and tangents and digressions, the wellness content in a much more focused way. So even though that is often the way I'm mentally walking through life, the forced sit down, the forced stop, the forced arrest brought that to a whole other level of Oh, okay. So this is what it's like to really let go of the other thoughts, the busyness, the logistical stuff. And yeah, it was. I found it kind of fascinating. So that's going to be a focus of today's episode. I'm going to argue for the benefits of dropping one's defenses, and there'll be a little bit of martial arts analogizing in there as well, which I think you'll understand, maybe get something out of. Yeah. So anyway, I will return to that in due course. So yes, as I said, movies. There have been movies, and that was one of the really nice things. Last weekend, I was able to just really hang out with my daughter and watch movies. It's one of our favourite things to do, and we picked a few doozies, a few really good ones, and we were flicking through Netflix, and I said, "Oh, stop, go back. I think you'll enjoy this one." And it was a movie from 1996 called Fly Away Home, which was based on a true story, and fundamentally it was about a little girl who had to move in with her father, who was separated from her mother after her mother died in a car crash. And she moved to Canada to his farm, where he had a big barn and worked as an inventor. And she stumbles across some abandoned eggs in a nearby woods that have been deforested, and the eggs hatch, and she has a little flock, a gaggle, actually, that's the collective noun, a little gaggle of baby geese. And the story simply is one of how they have to try and teach or lead those geese on their migratory path down south to warmer climes. And Anna Paquin is the daughter, and Jeff Daniels is the dad. And really, that's the key dynamic in the story. Jeff Daniels, he's just such a reliable presence. He really isn't ever bad. Quite the contrary. He's good. He's just got such an easy presence on screen. And look, it is very much a mid-90s film. But what was very nice to see was, after a little while, I realised that the director of this movie, which was essentially a child engaging with wildlife, a child engaging with animals, a child engaging with nature and finding solace in that relationship, a child who was in many ways isolated, in this case in her grief, and a certain amount of estrangement from her eccentric father. But the film was actually directed by the same director who did the Black Stallion from years and years and years ago. Do you remember the Black Stallion? I was trying to persuade my daughter to watch it recently, and she's been quite reluctant, and she's held out and managed to keep me at bay with that one. But the Black Stallion was a favourite of ours when we were kids. Bit of a boy's own adventure. Boy shipwrecked on an island with a horse who also survived the shipwreck, and they bond, and then there's an adventure. But the director's name is Carol Ballard, and when I looked at his filmography, I realised this was a bit of a specialty of his. He has other animal child movies that seem to be critically quite well received. But anyway, Fly Away Home, very nice. And one of the things that was particularly nice about it was the cinematography. Beautiful cinematography by Caleb Deschanel, he's the father of Zooey Deschanel, the actress. If you know who she is, Dream Pixie Girl. Was that a show, or was that just how she came to be known? I find her intensely irritating as an actress. It's all just too cutesy, which is one of my absolute hates. But the photography was really, really lovely, and certainly the first part of the movie, I think, is told brilliantly. Just really efficient cinematic storytelling, very lean, just very very tight, and only showing what needed to be shown. So really, really good. So Fly I Home. There you go. There's a recommendation for you. Over the following days of the weekend, we watched Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jurassic Park. So two golden oldies, old classic Steven Spielberg entertainments. Raiders of the Lost Ark is still, I think, quite phenomenal. And what Spielberg achieved, and George Lucas was involved in that project as well. This sort of reimagining of Saturday serial TV, adventurers and these kind of devil make hair heroes from their childhoods, and they went, let's do this, let's make this big, crossing the world for fisticuffs and defeating Nazis. It stands up very, very well. And if you're interested in such things, you can go and seek out online Steven Soderbergh, the director. He has a website where he talks and writes about films, and his own thoughts on films. But he had put up a really interesting essay extolling Steven Spielberg's excellence as a visual storyteller, and Soderbergh kind of reminded the sort of the primacy of movies as a visual medium first and foremost. And to illustrate how good Spielberg was, Soderbergh put up Raiders of the Lost Ark in black and white with no dialogue. I presume the soundtrack was there, and he said you can watch this movie from start to finish and you'll understand everything, because Spielberg is so good at telling the story through pictures. So that's one if you want to nerd out and go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark in black and white as a silent movie and still get so much out of it. And indeed, rewatching the opening of it with my daughter at the weekend, that famous sequence going into the temple in South America to get the little golden head and then surviving all the booby traps on the way out. Very, very impressive storytelling. Every beat, every shot, advancing the story, advancing the tension, the suspense, and of course presenting Indiana Jones in that iconic way. The hat, the jacket, the bullwhip, embodied so well by Harrison Ford at his, I suppose, in his prime, really. You'd have to say, just the effortless charm and resilience and toughness, and really, really good. And Karen Allen, very good at as his romantic foil in that. And Ron Lacey, British character actor, was that his name? Ron Lacey? Oh my goodness, he is terrifying in Raiders of the Lost Ark as, basically he looks like a Gestapo torturer, but really, really horrible. And yeah, he had the same effect on my daughter as he had on me when I saw it first, and I saw it at the same age as my daughter, about 8. My God, he just embodied something so sinister and creepy and gross with this sort of reptilian voice. And I was going, I don't think I've seen that guy in anything ever since. But Ronald Lacey, God. Anyway, so there you go. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Jurassic Park, grand. I mean, the effects. Some of the dinosaurs still age very well. Overall, as a movie, you're watching it and you're kind of going, they got Sam Neill, who's a very reliable actor, but he doesn't have that real star quality of Harrison Ford. But then in Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs were the stars, the effects were the stars, and there are some fantastic sequences in that movie. particularly the first extended sequence with the T-Rex and the kids in the car, and I know, very, very good, very good, well worth checking out. Anyway, so there you go. That was movies with my daughter, and another one, right? And sorry, this isn't gonna. I'm gonna move on from movies here shortly. Another one, I had the opportunity to watch Urban Cowboy. Urban Cowboy, directed by James Bridges, 1980, and an early John Travolta vehicle post the Saturday Night Live hysteria, or Saturday Night Fever, Saturday Night Fever hysteria, and the John Travolta explosion. And I remember seeing bits of Urban Cowboy as a kid, which basically is the story of a young Texan cowboy. And it's, it's set in 1980, so it's, it's contemporary, a contemporaneous movie of the time. And he's a young rural cowboy in Texas who moves to the big city. He moves to Houston. And he's green, he's young, he's dumb, and he moves to the outskirts of Houston. His dad works in some sort of refinery or plant, and gets the young Travolta work there. But really the main focus of the movie is around this huge bar called Gillies, which is this massive cowboy bar where, there's dancing and music and drinking and fighting, and the owner plays a bit of music. And fascinatingly, in the movie, there are 3 or 4 appearances by established country acts. Prominently, Bonnie Raitt does a number at some point in the movie, and they're there as themselves, entertaining the crowd. And also, one of my old favourites when I was a kid, the Charlie Daniels Band. Their song, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, anytime that came on the radio when I was a kid, I used to just love it. And it was part of a fascination. It contributed to my fascination with depictions of Satan, the devil. I remember he used to occasionally crop up in Marvel comics as Mephisto. And I always just found the devil a compelling and chilling, terrifying figure. But the narrative of The Devil Went Down to Georgia is such a great little story, where the devil challenges a young fiddle player to a duel, and if the fiddle player loses, the devil gets his soul. And it's just a little bit of sort of redneck badassery, where the fiddle player outplays the devil and sends him packing back to hell. And there's a bit of attitude, and the character of the young fiddle player gets to call the devil a son of a bitch. I remember as a kid, I just thought that was the coolest thing. I can imagine telling the devil where to go. So I was enjoying the movie immensely, and Charlie Daniels Band were there a couple of times, but then they did, maybe 2/3 of the way through the film, or 4/5, they struck up The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and I was like, okay, that's it. I was enjoying this movie very much, and now it's just gone into all-time classic status for me. But it's actually a really good movie. It's a really good movie. And John Travolta, doing what he did so well, he was just this great kind of physical specimen, but, the big kind of eyes, and he had this kind of soulfulness and a sort of a vulnerability, but also this kind of braggadocio. And he falls in love with a woman who he meets at Gillies, and played brilliantly by Debra Winger. In fact, for me, she takes the acting laurels from the movie, because she just seems to, I don't know, she just captures something so believable. Just this kind of this I don't know. I've been young and clueless and a little bit helpless, but sort of cocky and mixing it up, and ultimately what happens is the movie's 42 years old, so to hell with you if you're concerned about spoilers. But John Travolta's character and Debra Winger's character, they get married, and within a week they're having rows that threaten to break them up. They're in their trailer, their caravan, and he just, they're just so emotionally inarticulate, and, as I say, clueless. And there's a vulnerability there in the relationship, and then the big bad pounces, and it's Scott Glenn. And I didn't even check what age he was, but Scott Glenn in the most phenomenal physical condition, lean and cut, and he plays a real nasty piece of work. But Debra Winger is instantly attracted to him. John Travolta is instantly threatened by him, and they break up. And John Travolta allows himself to be seduced by this high-class girl who's slumming it in Gillies from uptown Houston, and she takes him back to her swanky apartment, and she has no money issues. Her daddy's in oil, and so there's this kind of class tension that's happening as well. And you should seek it out. You should seek it out. And one of the main the main vehicles of tension and competition in the movie, apart from dancing and drinking and fighting, is a bucking bronco in the pub, like a machine, where the local guys get up and see can they stay on the bronco holding on with one hand, and it's operated by some guy with his little controller. And this is ultimately where John Travolta focuses his efforts to go, right, I'm going to show him, what I can do on this. And it's just, it's almost like a little, filmic ethnography of a certain class of, Texan cowboy and Texan suburban life at that time. And it feels very real, and I've no doubt that a lot of those people who were extras in that movie were locals. So there's something of, there's a verisimilitude about it that just comes through, even though ultimately it's a love story. I saw some critics describe it as a romantic comedy, but pretty light on the comedy. But there's a youthful exuberance in the performances of Debra Winger and John Travolta that sort of raises the story out of its milieu somehow, and you're sort of not as bogged down in the sort of the grittiness of it, like the working class reality and kind of narrow dimensionality of the social scene. So really, really enjoyable. Really, really enjoyable. So there you go. Urban Cowboy. Go and find it. I'm sure you can find it. You can find it online. Stream it, rent it online. I think it's well worth checking out. And even if you're just going to put your eyes on three great early performances by Travolta, Winger, and Glenn, a couple of hours well spent. So there you go. Now, it was while I was watching Fly Away Home, the goose the goose migration movie, that was only day 2 of isolation, and I was still feeling pretty rough, but I sat down to watch that with my daughter when she came home from school. And it was while I was watching that and realising how affected I was by Caleb Deschanel's beautiful photography, and how moved I was by Carol Ballard's excellent storytelling and the nice acting performance by Anna Paquin. It was in that moment I was really enjoying it, and I felt, oh man, I'm going to be overwhelmed by this. And I was like, okay, my defenses are down. I'm completely helpless. Helpless from being manipulated by this very well told story. Gets a bit cheesy towards the end. Lost a little bit of its, a little bit of that leanness and a little bit of that emotional punch. But a very, very good movie nonetheless. But yeah, and I just thought, while I was kind of feeling, I had that realization that I'm going to be opened up emotionally by this movie, and part of my awareness just going, this is really nice to be sitting here with my daughter watching this movie on a Friday afternoon, and enjoying that, and just feeling wrecked from the COVID. I suppose I just felt this is actually really positive. This being this sick and being like completely laid low by this has presented this opportunity to just go right down to the lowest possible gear and to not be concerned about anything else and to not be stressed about anything else. I mean, when I tested positive, I was stressed about that. I was very frustrated because I knew immediately it was going to mean the loss of income. I had some more karate commitments that I wasn't going to be able to fulfill at my daughter's school. And one of those was going to be a workshop that I was working on earlier this year. I was trying to put together I don't know if I want to call it a program, but a little workshop on holistic self-defense. And I'd arranged with the school to go in and do a couple of hours of this workshop with their 6th class group, the guys who were about to leave primary school and head off to big secondary school. And I was really looking forward to getting in and doing that with them. And unfortunately, I had to let that go. So I was really disappointed and frustrated to have missed that opportunity to do that work with those guys, and not to mention the loss of income. But that was day one. By day two, I'd kind of gone, sleep. But yeah, it got me thinking. It got me thinking about this idea then of really, really dropping our defenses, making that decision to put down the weapons, to put down the means of protection, and to allow ourselves to be unconcerned by that, and to allow ourselves to be fully. I think how I experienced it was it does invite in a very present state, and I know that's a recurring theme on the podcast, and certainly I believe, and there's nothing unique or original in my thinking, that the ability to engage with being present at different times, I don't think it's readily available at all times, not by any means, but when there are opportunities to bring ourselves into our bodies and to be present in that way, I believe it's very beneficial. I believe it's very therapeutic. And ironically, when we're sick, it can be one of the positive side effects, because obviously sickness can so often be a physical assault on the system, and it can be very grounding and bring us down to as I say, a very sort of base state of being, because we don't have any other juice. We don't have anything extra with which to take our physical selves elsewhere and to engage with other things. And of course, that alters our brain state as well, because if we're giving ourselves over to it, there's no conflict. There's no tension. And That, I think, is a very powerful idea to work with. There is no conflict. And so if you can work with this, it's kind of a reverse logic idea. Many of us understand life in attritional terms. Life is battle, life is struggle, life is sacrifice, life is effort, life is, staying sharp, staying hungry, getting into things, putting ourselves out there, and taking some licks, taking some digs, taking some punches. And I don't think I'm introducing a very novel idea there. I think in many ways that's a very relatable lens to present. Many of us feel embattled just by the effort to survive, just by the effort to walk upright, just by the effort to get ourselves out the door, just by the effort to present ourselves for consumption, for a public meeting point in some way, whether it's in our workplaces, even in our social lives. That can be a huge effort. And maybe as we get older, that can become a dominant theme, or maybe it's a midlife experience as parents of younger children, and just trying to stay afloat. And certainly over the last couple of years, with the circumstances of the pandemic, with, I think, evident political disruption, evident political instability around the world, growing populism, growing extreme nationalism, growing wealth inequality, growing poverty in so many ways, like food poverty, fuel poverty. You can talk about health poverty, education poverty, all of these factors. Of course, climate change sits above everything. I mean, is this, are we living with a ticking clock? Are we moving ever closer to planetary destruction, which has its own impact on economics? The pandemic has played its part in, and again, this is anecdotal. I don't have any data, nor do I have any data. Anxiety levels are up. Suicidal ideation is up. People's mental health is in a fractious state. So all of these things contribute to a sense of us, we people, normal humans, we earthlings, of all of us being in a fight, being in a battle. And that then, of course, is there's conflict. There's conflict in those concepts. How can there not be? What do you every day you're trying to beat something. Every day you're trying to win something. Every day you're trying to overcome something. And it doesn't present itself in a literal way. Often what we're fighting with is ourselves. Often the battle is to overcome our own sense of cynicism, or our own sense of futility, or our own sense of exhaustion, or our own sense of stress. And those aren't small things. And I applaud anyone who manages to get out the door. or if you're working from home, manages to work from home and maintain a level of composure and maintain a level of positivity and maintain a level of proactivity, I applaud that. If you're someone who's engaging with the world, if you're someone who's thinking about the world, if you're someone who's affected by so many negative aspects of where we find ourselves in the 21st century, to maintain a sort of a positive sensibility is, I think, an enormous triumph, frankly. And here's my reverse logic. If we can come back to this idea of how we think of conflict, and instead of engaging with a conviction that conflict is the status quo, that every day it's going to be an effort, every day we've got to bounce out of bed ready for the fight, and because of that we have to have weapons, because of that we have to be ready to protect ourselves, because of that we can't drop our guard, we can't drop our defenses. Our defenses have to be up because it's attritional out there. Someone's going to get me, or something is going to get me. So defenses up. Now, what happens if you engage with the idea of, maybe because I have my defenses up all the time, it feels like the world is out for me? What if, because I have my defenses up all the time, it feels like life's a battle and life is attritional? What if it's because I have my defenses up that I have embedded this conviction that this is the only way to survive, by constantly being in this heightened state of readiness to fight? And let's just go there. Readiness to engage with fight or flight, because that's a defensive position as well. Obviously, fight is to meet it head on and go into battle. Flight is retreat, but that is still a defensive action. That is still a self-protecting action. So I'm just engaging with this idea at the moment for my own sort of edification and as a sort of a mental exercise. What if we drop the defenses? What if we drop the defenses and start to embed the idea of, it's okay, I don't need to have my guard up. It's okay, I don't need to be on high alert, ready for a fight. What if I drop my guard and embed an idea that things are going to be okay? What if I drop my guard and embed the idea that every day won't be a battle, that I'm not under assault, that I don't need this extra enormous and ever-present effort to keep myself safe? See, that's a shift. That's a shift in thinking. It's a shift that I think is instinctively confronting and instinctively sort of threatening to one's sense of well-being. But I suppose what I'm advocating is, it's not good for our well-being to have our defenses up all the time. It's not good for our well-being to be in a mindset of defensiveness, or being in a mindset of having to be ready to strike, of being in the mindset of I'm about to go into battle. That, in my opinion, is incredibly draining and distracting and limiting. And if I think about it from a martial arts point of view, And this is, again, it might sound counterintuitive, but you're a much more effective fighter when you're relaxed. You're a much more effective fighter when you're calm. And you read a situation much better when you're calm. And that doesn't mean you just stand there and let yourself be hit, or let an attack come and then respond. I mean, that is a choice. That is actually a strategy. But if you adopt a very obvious defensive position, and have your guard up, and are committed to holding that guard up in a very rigid way, it's one-dimensional, and it becomes ineffective very quickly, and it also becomes exhausting. And so I think one way to approach that situation when you're actually in, and I'm leaving this strictly in the sort of the world of karate for the moment and sparring in karate, there's a sort of a mental game that you have to play, which is to almost enter an unguarded state, like a soft brain state, and regard your opponent as someone who is fundamentally non-threatening. And that's the best way you're going to deal with what they actually are, which is a highly skilled opponent who could knock your head off. But the mental game is to go, I don't need to adrenalize. It's very hard. It's very hard to counter that impulse, and a certain amount of that is welcome in terms of getting the juices flowing, because you don't want to be detached. You don't want to go into a sort of a removed state. And so again, there's a contradiction here. It's not about disengagement, but it's about engaging in a very different way, and engaging in a way that is dedicated to a certain type of combat aware serenity. Now, you'll hear athletes and competitors and fighters across all sports talk about being in the zone, and in a way I'm talking around that concept, where everything just flows and you respond optimally to everything. Now, that sort of optimal response pattern doesn't happen without years of training. It may not happen even without a certain amount of natural ability, but it does happen. It does happen for high-level competitors, and amateurs can experience that as well. And that being in the zone, of course, another way to describe that is being present. Now, what I'm arguing for is this idea that if I drop my defenses, okay, I'm talking more generally again, just our general day-to-day living. I'm stepping away from karate again. But if I drop my defenses, am I going to teach my brain to perceive the world as non-threatening? Because that is sort of where I want to live. Because then my brain can move to other places where I can better apply my skills. And I will spend less time fueling my own anxiety, or fueling my fears, or fueling my self-doubt, or fueling my anger. The anger that is a product of frustration, the anger that is a product of stress, the anger that is a product of perceiving the world a certain way and perceiving oneself in the world a certain way. And so my argument is to drop those defenses and to try to embed an idea of non-violence and non-conflict. So I'm using non-violence there in a sense of, how am I meeting the world? In what mode am I meeting the world? Because if I stay in this mindset of attrition, in this mindset of fight, of battle, of combat, I'm making myself a combatant, and I am making myself a fighter, and I'm putting myself into the conflict as someone who is going to engage in battle. And so if by extension we can interpret that then as a form of violence, of necessary aggression, I think it's worth engaging with a counter idea of, I actually don't need to do that. And this is something that I've experienced in my life when dealing with aggressive people. If I remain calm and I remain non-violent, but also unintimidated, it can very quickly diffuse conflict situations. So my experience has been, aggressive people or angry people, they want they want the conflict made literal. They want to engage in battle, and they want to bring you out of your comfort zone into their space of let's fight. And they're primed. They're in that mode, that angry mode, that aggressive mode, that confrontational mode, that domineering mode, that bullying mode, and they're used to getting certain results from that behavior. Their own embedded behavior, whatever they're acting out, whatever experience, whatever pattern, whatever childhood trauma, whatever area of their life they might be hiding from or denying or repressing, and it comes out in this personality type, and that's how they meet the world. And what I found over the years is the non-violent response to that, the non-aggressive response to that, the non-combative response to that is almost every time very disarming. So it's not a disengagement, but it's an unwillingness to engage on those terms. And I suppose ultimately this brings me back to one of my sort of foundational beliefs of keeping well. It's on whose terms are you living your life? And do you believe in the power of your own agency? Do you believe that you can set terms? And if you don't believe that, I think you're disadvantaged. And I think there's a limitation to your sort of a limitation to the sort of the amount of avenues you can pursue to feeling more well and to feeling more capable and to feeling more aligned with a world that you might find otherwise very challenging. So, and this is to bring it back then to martial arts, to fighting, to actual sparring fighting. Every fighter has their own tempo, their own strategy, their own style of fighting, and some fighters will be very overtly aggressive. I've seen that from my earliest days doing karate. Guys who thrive on very sort of And when I say guys, I mean, men and women, boys and girls, male and female competitors. Many drop into that alpha mode of very performed aggression, the outward display of aggression, the snarling face, the blazing eyes, a sort of a hyper aggressive posturing, which I mean, sure. And listen, by the way, some of those are excellent fighters and very good karate people, and that's a mode that serves them well. And there are set terms. There's a specific frame of reference that they're dropping into, bringing in that attitude. It never served me, and it was never something that it was never something I was interested in acting out as a competitor. Not that I did a huge amount of competition, or not that I've done a huge amount of competition in karate. That wasn't really what attracted me to it ever, although I did a little bit. But certainly in dojo sparring, in a training setting, there's always sparring, and that's a different beast. Competition has particular rules. There's a very particular limit in terms of the repertoire of techniques you can use in competition, certainly in my style of karate, the affiliation that I've been associated with. But in dojo sparring, barring street stuff or dirty fighting, the full repertoire of techniques is available to you. And so, it's a time to experiment, it's a time to play, it's a time to try stuff out, and it's a time to play with tactics and strategy. It's the time, to decide, right, I'm just going to work one side of the opponent's body. I'm going to keep trying to put them onto their weak side. I'm going to keep trying to take the front leg. I'm going to keep trying to distract them and do unorthodox feints. I'm going to constantly close space. I'm going to constantly move off the line of attack. I'm going to constantly vary my tempo. I'm only going to counterattack. I'm only going to use a single counterattack. It could be any number of things. It could be any number of things. But for me, the objective always, when I was fighting, whatever the context was, to remain calm and to focus on being effective. And I felt for my personality type, trying to bring extra juice to performed aggression, I just felt that was going to be a waste of energy. So I doubt I was ever considered an intimidating opponent. But see, that can work to your advantage as well, because then you're underrated. And then you strike and people are like, oh, you are willing to fight. And see, that to me I would advocate that. I would advocate that into this recipe of wellness that I'm talking about today. That you don't have to show people you've got your guard up. You don't have to even show yourself that you've got your guard up. You can drop it. It's okay. But you can certainly engage with the idea that you are not defenseless. I mean, that's a very important idea. It's not just giving yourself over to being beaten up by life or by someone else. That's not the thing. You can certainly engage very strongly with the idea that I am not defenseless, and I am willing to defend myself on my own terms. And that can be a non-violent choice. That can be, I choose not to engage with this argument. That can be, I choose not to speak to you in that way. That can be any number of things where you are asserting your own value system and asserting your own sort of, your own personal space within the conflict zone. And that, that is something that I certainly used to put into practice when I was teaching. So way back when, we're talking over 10 years ago, going into classrooms in, let's just call them rough schools, with kids who are pretty disenfranchised, pretty disengaged from the idea of formal education, and every part of school was a playground. And certainly when a substitute teacher walked in, that was playtime, that wasn't education time. And it took me quite a few years to find a comfort zone within that environment that would still allow me to, hopefully have a positive impact on the students who are in front of me, but also keep my own sense of personal safety and keep my composure and remain calm, so I could be effective as a teacher and effective as an adult presence, and a positive adult presence. And so I used to, when I knew I was going into a classroom where I was likely to find more than one student who would be trying to provoke me, stir me, get a reaction out of me, embroil me in some sort of conflict, argument, debate, I realized that it's actually okay. I can choose not to get sucked into their space, and I can sit at my desk and stay calm, have my eyes up, not try and hide from whatever's going on. But that was, I was literally making that my safe zone and going, I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to stay calm. I'm going to be very open to whatever's going on in the room. I'm going to talk. I'm going to engage. But I'm not going to get sucked into a war. I'm not going to get sucked into a row. And it was very effective. And what happened over time was the students would just gravitate towards the desk and gravitate towards me, and that's where we'd engage. And I'm talking like in a positive sense, just coming up for chats or coming up to to look at work at the desk, and I remained in a safe place, but not disengaged. And you see that sometimes in the depiction of martial artists, especially in movies, where before going into battle, they might have this moment of being very internal, and the eyes will close down, and they might summon their energy into a place of greater resolve and composure, and sort of set themselves before then opening their eyes and going into battle. So that sense of bringing the energy back to oneself and centering oneself and being composed and still and present in oneself. I mean, even just saying that, I already feel calmer. But that's something you can engage with, as a meditative practice. That's just bringing yourself into your breathing, into your body, into your mind in a calm way before proceeding, and taking control of your agency. And I think that's a relevant component of what I'm talking about, because I think many of us can feel that we don't have agency at times, that life is dictating the tempo, and the things outside of ourselves are dictating the tempo, and they're pulling us this way and that, and there's always something else making demands of us and calling for our attention, and we feel it can contribute to a sense of fatigue and exhaustion, and a sense of being constantly suspended, like a held breath, and you just don't get that release. You don't get that downtime. You don't get to drop. Now, you think if you've got your defenses up constantly, that's a similar state of, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting to be hit. I'm waiting to have to defend myself. I'm waiting to have to block whatever that move is. That is not a particularly calm state. Even though martial artists can train themselves to deploy those skills in a more relaxed way and hold a defensive guard, with, in a more sort of responsive, a held responsive state, waiting to react, counter-react. But ultimately, to drop that guard and go, it's okay. What's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll deal with it when it happens. And I'm not going to expend energy, any more energy than I need to. And I'm going to trust that I will respond well to whatever situation comes before me. That is, you might say it's delusional, but it could also reflect confidence. It could reflect a deep faith in your own abilities to cope. And that is something I think is worth investing in. I think it's worth investing in the idea that you have much greater resources than you might give yourself credit for. We live in an age where we're exposed to and consume the success of others constantly. And social media plays its role, and the 24-hour news cycle plays its role. The ever-present availability of digital devices and screens with which to consume the lives of others plays its role as well. And there's something about the social media age, the internet age, the digital age, whatever you want to call it, that means it's very, very hard not to be aware of the apparent happy, successful, beautiful, wealthy, healthy lives of others. And it's very hard not to fall into the comparison game. Look what they have. Look what they're doing. Look at the shape they're in. Look at those clothes. Look at that house. Look at that car. Look at their followers. Look at their branding opportunities. Look at their endorsements. And that is, that can be used as something to motivate. That can be used as something to inspire. Maybe you just want to be a fan. Maybe you're just a casual browser. But it can also be very unhealthy. And it can also be something that's demoralizing. And it can open up a door to feelings of inadequacy. It can open up doors to negative body image. And it can also really open up a door to a very false perception of what is real. Because let's remind ourselves, so much of what we see online, and I'm no different in this regard in terms of what I put up on social media in terms of the podcast, and what I put up to try and bring eyes to what I'm doing and bring ears to the podcast. What I'm doing is curating, and I'm presenting certain windows. I'm saying, oh, don't look in that window. Look in this window. And I'm not putting up, things that I don't want to be seen. Now, I don't have a problem with that, because I think that's sensible, and that's exercising a certain amount of control. And as much as I advocate and engage in a certain dynamic on the podcast, which revolves around being honest and authentic and real and vulnerable, there's limits to what people want to know, and limits to what people want to see, and there's a value in restraint, and there's a value in controlling what you reveal. Don't give everything away. Don't give everything of yourself away. I'm not talking about about personally. I'm not talking about my secrets, but you've got to retain something that is private and that is yours. And that isn't just, everything isn't available for consumption. And I think that's connected to self-care and self-worth, and putting a value on who you are and what you're willing to what you're willing to share, and being very comfortable with that, and being very comfortable with, again, this is where this started from today, being very comfortable with just being on your own, without sticking a post up on Facebook or Instagram, or doing a hilarious TikTok video, or trying to build your brand. It's okay. It's okay just to chill. And I know that's a very narrow lens that I'm talking about there. And this is not meant to all hinge on what you're doing on social media or what you're presenting to the world, but in that area. But I mean, to bring it back to the general thesis of how you go out in the world and how you engage with life, I think it's absolutely fine to underperform. There you go. Yet again, I come back to my celebration of mediocrity, of failure, of procrastination. Success can wait. That's my mantra. It's okay. It's okay not to achieve it all today. It's okay to remove the shiny carapace. It's okay to take off the armor. It's okay to keep it very lo-fi and really go to embrace a sort of a silence and a humility and an invisibility, and just to bring all that energy back to yourself, and to be that small. That's okay. I would go so far as to say that that's excellent. To bring in that stillness is something to be welcomed, to be embraced. So drop the guard. It's okay. Put those hands down. Breathe. 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 Sit down with yourself. Have a cup of tea. Relax. And then take the next moment when it comes. Okay. I think that's all I've got today. I'm not sure, as ever, I'm not sure if if the through line remained intact. But I did my best. Just to finish today, it wasn't all movies. I read a fantastic book yesterday. I picked it up in the morning and I finished it last night. And it is called I Am Someone. And the author is Aisling Cregan, who is an artist, and now on the strength of this book she is a writer, and in this book she tells the story of her extremely difficult childhood, her traumatic childhood, and it is the story of her survival and her emergence into adulthood, bowed but unbeaten. And the book was only released a couple of months ago by Gill, I think. I don't think Gill and Macmillan, but Gill. I'll get back to you with all these details. But it's a brilliant account of negotiating a traumatic childhood, with everything that suggests. And Aisling's just a few years older than me, so she described. I grew up in Dublin, but she describes an Ireland that I felt I recognised very well, and aspects of her childhood I recognised very well, and it was just a compelling read, and told in a very straightforward, unfussy, no bullshit way, very spare prose, which kind of made it more immediate and made the darker passages more harrowing in a way, and it's a very moving story as well. And I think because I was embracing this idea of having my defences down this week, I found myself in tears at several stages as I read the book. So I'd highly recommend you seek it out, buy it online, buy it in bookshops. I know she had a book launch in Eason's not that long ago, but that is I Am Someone by Aisling Cregan, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to get Aisling on the podcast to have an interview with her about the book and her life and her art, and her whole journey and her recovery journey, I suppose. I'll have to see if she agrees with that way of putting it. So that is something to look forward to. It might not be next week's episode, but perhaps the episode afterwards. So do look out for that book, I Am Someone by Aisling Cregan. A really compelling read, and a tremendous story of someone's personal resilience and a triumph of the spirit of the individual in extremely tough circumstances. So there you go. I think that's a pretty nice note to finish on today. The sun is shining. It's looking beautiful out there, and I am confident, truly confident this time. A week from now, or whenever I next record, my voice will be fully back. I'm still a little bit congested. You can probably hear that. There's an octopus, some determined octopus of something lingering at the back of my sinuses and my throat, and just refusing to scooch off back to its sea of tranquility. But it will leave eventually. Okay, as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope you got something out of today's episode. You can find me on the dreaded social media. The Clear Out Podcast is on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. The Clear Out 2, that's the number 2, the digit 2. The Clear Out 2 is on Twitter. And should you feel the need, you can email me at theclearoutlive at gmail.com. And if you ever feel you want to throw some money, some financial support, some financial assistance, a financial endorsement at the Clear Out, you can do so using the supporter link, which will be there in the description, wherever you're listening to this podcast. Or if you want to become a regular contributor to the show, to become a patron, you can use patreon.com/the Clear Out. And there will be a link for that also, wherever you're listening to this show. This tell. Thank you for listening to the tell. Okay, all the best. Mind yourselves. Take care. I look forward to talking to you again real soon. All the best. Bye.